some of you have done more action research than others, but to run through the main steps of action research, the first thing is to identify a change that you'd like to bring about. That's why this recurring theme of change, teachers as agents of change, this notion of bringing about change. So the first step is to look at what we do and identify an area of change. Often in the early literature, the change was always problematic. There was always a problem. It was kind of negative in a way, that people always wanted to bring about a change because there was a problem. So I tend to point out that the change doesn't have to be to do with fixing a problem. It can be something more positive, but some sort of change that you'd like to bring about. Perhaps you'd like your students to speak more English in your classrooms. That's a common global or universal challenge that I come across with teachers in many different countries, is they say our students sometimes are okay with reading and writing, but they're really very reluctant to speak in class. So a common change is they say we'd like our students to speak more English, to speak more of the target language, in this case English, in the classroom. The second step is to observe what's going on currently. And often with that example, students tend to revert to their first language in monolingual classrooms. If all the students share a common language, it makes sense for them to revert to their first language. So identify a change, observe the present situation, and then plan what are referred to as interventions, different possible interventions. What could, in this example, help your students produce more of the target language orally or verbally? So to plan some different interventions, for example, you might decide that using more small group work might help, or you might decide that using more whole class activities would help. So plan a number of possible different interventions. Try them out. That's what number 4 really means, carry out the intervention, and very carefully observe the effects of the intervention. And that sounds fairly simple, but in my experience, teachers do tend to evaluate before or during the observation. So the observation stage is absolutely critical. What happens when you tried out the different interventions? In terms of your goal, which was to promote more speaking, did you realize the goal? Was there more speaking in the target language? And as the posting just said, something we do unconsciously or subconsciously. And yes, I think to some extent that's true. And that's why teachers, I think, are very good at this kind of research, because they're doing it in a way all the time. But what action research tries to do is to make it more conscious. The posting there talks about unconscious. So the idea is to make it more conscious and more systematic, and to break it down into a series of steps, because teachers are really good at this stuff. Language teachers, in my experience, are particularly good at doing all of those 6 steps very quickly. The 7th step, which is about publishing or sharing the findings, they don't often do. But the first 6 steps, I agree with that posting that says, is this something that we do unconsciously? Yes, it is. And action research is an attempt to bring it from the background to the foreground, to make it more conscious and make it more systematic.